Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel. Today we're going to be doing a tier list video for EUIC. Of course, EUIC is coming up this weekend. I'm excited for it. You're excited for it. And I'm really interested to see what decks will do well. And I've created a tier list here of all the decks that have performed well at Limitless. I've kind of just gathered a bunch of different decks. There could even be more that I maybe missed out on for this tier list. But these are just decks that have done well at Limitless and I think will see some play at EUIC because of what we've seen happen on Play.Limitless so far. And I'm excited to take a look into what could be the best decks for EUIC. If y'all are going to enjoy today's video here on this tier list, make sure to leave a like in the video. And if you haven't subbed here to the second channel, click that subscribe button down below. We are getting close to 4,000 subscribers. So I would appreciate if y'all went ahead and subscribe to the second channel so you don't miss out on any content. If you want to try this tier list yourself, I will leave a link to it down in the description below if you also want to do this tier list. Again, there could be more decks we could add. We just haven't seen the meta fully evolve yet past what we've seen on Play.Limitless, but after EUIC, I'm sure we'll get even more results heading into the next major tournament, which I think is Portland, which is what's going to happen after EUIC. But let's take a look here at the tier list. So things off with Shadow Rider. Now, Shadow Rider is a really cool deck. It uses Hatterene V and Klefki. So the idea is you have a Hatterene V that does 80 damage and then hits and runs to the bench. You can promote Klefki after you attack with Hatterene, and you kind of shut off a bunch of abilities with Klefki. You do combine this with Shadow Rider VMAX, of course, to power up your Hatterene V, but you also use Shadow Rider to just build up a ton of energy. And you get to a point where Shadow Rider can just take a massive one-hit KO with Max Geist. The deck is really, really cool, and I like it quite a bit in the meta. It's definitely not a bad deck, and I think maybe it could be tier 2 right now going into EUIC. It's not bad. It actually started doing well on Limitless kind of earlier on. I definitely want to try this deck out down the road at some point, but I definitely think that Shadow Rider Hatterene V Klefki is a legit decent deck right now in the format. I think it could be a tier 2 deck, in all honesty. It's really not that bad. In the format where one-hit KOing stuff is very important, Shadow Rider can put in a lot of work again. You build up a buttload of energy for Shadow Rider's Max Geist attack to one-hit KO stuff, and you also just shut down decks like Comfy's, and you shut off Muse and Genesect and stuff. Well, mainly Genesect and Comfy with the Klefki. Next up is Miraidon. Now we're just talking like a straight Miraidon deck here. We can do like Miraidon Magnezone, I guess, could be the pick. I think Miraidon's probably a tier 1 deck. Maybe not tier S per se, but I think Miraidon is really good. I think the problem with Miraidon is figuring out those awkward matchups, like specifically the Lost Zone matchups. And even something like Gardevoir can be a little tricky to beat too. I think the issue is Miraidon kind of walks into Skyseal Stone pretty easily. When you're playing, your Regieleki VMAXs down to hit those right numbers, you kind of just walk into like Skyseal Stone knockouts. Like they'll go knock out Miraidon, which isn't even hard to do. Miraidon's only got 220 HP, and then they'll like Skyseal Stone a Regieleki either with Zapdos or like Zacian or something. And I think that's the biggest problem with Miraidon is it's too squishy of a deck. It is pretty strong though. Again, being able to take turn 1 knockouts with Electric Generator Miraidon is pretty insane right now. I legit think that Miraidon is a good deck. I think it's definitely tier 1, and I don't know if I would call it a tier S deck yet. I know Magnezone V-Star is seeing play right now in Miraidon, and I definitely think Magnezone is a really cool tech card in Miraidon. But I'm not confident in Miraidon's ability just yet to be a tier S deck, though I do think we will see a Miraidon deck do well in EUIC. I'll save that for my EUIC predictions video later on this week, but I definitely think Miraidon is tier 1. I don't think it's any higher than tier 1. I think that it's too squishy right now to be a tier S deck. I definitely think it is still a really good deck. It could even be maybe the best tier 1 deck. Next up is Gardevoir. I think Gardy, without a doubt, is tier S. I think it is probably one of the best decks going into UIC. I think a lot of people are going to play it because it's just a fun deck to play. It's also just really strong, and with Skyseal Stone Zacian and the amount of different attacking options you have to choose from, including another cool Gardevoir deck, which we'll get to later on. You can probably see here on the tier list. But yeah, no, Gardevoir seems pretty good right now. And I think it's definitely a tier S deck. I think it is better than Miraidon. I think Gardevoir has a lot more room for potential. There's a lot of cool tech cards you can play in Miraidon. Or Gardevoir, sorry. I know there's Cresselia, there's a Wobbuffet, there's all kinds of cards you can play with Gardevoir. And I think Gardevoir is actually a pretty strong deck right now. I'm definitely going to call it a tier S deck. Like when Gardevoir gets set up, it's really hard to beat because it just kind of destroys you with like Gardevoir and Zacian V Skyseal Stone. It's a really good deck when it sets up, and I think Gardy is positioned right now as a tier S deck in the meta, in my opinion. Next up is Oinkologne. I think Oinkolone's probably Rogue. It's a deck that like did well in Japan, but I think hasn't really crossed over very well over where we are. Because I think Oinkolone's just kind of a mid deck. I don't think it's a bad deck by any means, but I definitely think it's just kind of a mid deck overall. It's really cool with what it does. It's got an okay matchup against Lost Box, but I think it struggles against stuff like Giratina, And I think it loses to, like, Dialga, and it could probably lose to, like, most decks that just kind of do stuff against you. I think Goodra is going to be another tough one that Oinkologne is going to struggle with, so I'm not sold on Oinkologne. It's a cool deck, it's fun to play, but I don't think it's any higher than a Rogue deck, but I'm sure somebody will play it to EUIC, but we'll have to see. I definitely think Oinkologne is more of a Rogue deck. Its matchup spread is just kind of awkward in my opinion. I also don't know if it can beat Gardevoir. Yes, it does get to abuse Judge and Path, which is one of the selling points, but I don't know if the meta is really good for Oinkologne right now. There might just be too much Oko in the format for Oinkologne to really reach the potential that it could reach. So for now, I'm going to stick it in Rogue. Next up is Arceus Flying Pikachu with, like, Espeon, or just kind of like an Arc box deck, like an Arc pile deck, whatever you want to call it. Probably Rogue for now. Actually, we can call it Tier 2. We've seen a couple Arceus Espeon Pikachu decks actually do decent on Limitless. Basically, the idea is you just kind of have counter-intuitive attackers, like Espeon shuts off Giratina's V-Star power from damaging you, also getting rid of Sableye. So you can literally go like Arceus Espeon Pikachu. You can put Pikachu in play, have an Espeon in play, Max Balloon your opponent, and, like, the Lost Box deck can't do anything against you because Max Balloon, they can't Sableye your Pikachu because of Espeon's ability, which is kind of cool. And they can't Giratina you. The deck's honestly not even that bad, and it's just an Arceus deck. Arceus is still really good, of course. Trini Nova and Starburst are just really good to have right now in the meta. Arceus can be faster than most decks if you end up going first and you get a turn to Arceus. It can be pretty daunting to play against. Arceus can abuse cards like Judge. It abuses Bibarel and Squovit, which can be a pretty good engine. It gets Charon's Care, and Arceus is just very tanky. I think Arc Espeon Pikachu is really not a bad deck. I'm going to slam that in Tier 2. Next up is Arctina. I think Arctina is probably Tier 1. There's a world where maybe Arctina's Tier S, but I don't think it's, like, Tier S right now. I don't think it's, like, you go into EUIC or, like, I gotta beat Arctina. It's not that Tier S. But I think Arctina is definitely a Tier 1 deck. It's definitely one of the top decks in the format right now, in my opinion. Could even be, like, top 5 deck in the format. It's a really good deck, in my opinion. I think Arctina is really strong right now. It's basically just the most simplistic deck in the format, in my opinion. Like, it's more simple than every other deck here on this tier list. Basically, the idea is you just do things. You just Arceus, build up your Giratinas. You Giratina, knock out your opponent with Lost Impact. You get to spam Judge and Path the Peak, which is one of the main selling points behind Arctina. Like, Arceus Espeon doesn't really get to use Path that much because you can't use Path with Espeon's ability because you'll shut off your own Espeon, and then, like, you're playing as Lost Box. You Judge Path with Espeon in play, they get to Sableye you. It's not very good. But Arctina does get to abuse Judge and Path, which is one of the strongest combos. It's also just a deck that gets to abuse Judge in general. Judge is a really good card, and sometimes you're going to have games where Judge is going to stick and your opponent's going to get a really bad hand off of a Judge, and it's going to lose them the game because their hand they got off a Judge is terrible. And I think that's one of the literal selling points behind this deck is the Judge Path combo with Arctina. But yeah, I think Arctina is a really good deck. I think it's very strong. I don't know if the Pikachu build is the best way to play it. In my opinion, I think Pikachu is mandatory in Arceus Giratina because Pikachu fixes so many matchups. It fixes your Lugia matchup. It makes Lugia even, well, you can still beat Lugia with Judge Path, but I think that the Flying Pikachu in the Arctina deck makes the Lugia matchup even easier. I think it makes it from, like, potentially, like, maybe, I don't know, like a 60-40 to, like, all of a sudden, like a 75-25. Like, I legit think that Arctina with Pikachu makes the Lugia matchup even more winnable. And I also think Flying Pikachu is really good right now against other decks like Lost Box. I think Pikachu is really good against Lost Box and also really good against even stuff like Miraidon can be awkward for them because they have to build up Regieleki. You can pick off the Regielekis with Arctina. Yeah, and I think Arctina is really good right now. I definitely think it's a Tier 1 deck. Probably not Tier S, but I definitely think Arctina is a Tier 1 deck at the moment. I think it's a really cool idea that I think is going to be good, and I think we're going to see Arctina do pretty well. Maybe even get top 8. Because this was a deck when Lost Origin was a thing, but now that Lost Origin is no longer the main set, this deck kind of died off with Silver Tempest, but now is coming back, and all of a sudden is a really good deck. But yeah, no, I think that the Pikachu package is the best way to play Arctina, but I know the straightforward Arctina without Pikachu is still really good regardless, and I think it's definitely a Tier 1 deck. It's just really good. Very simple, very hard to deal with. Next up is Arceus Vulpix. We'll slow that in the Rogue tier. Arc Vulpix is basically use Vulpix V-Star, which is really good against Gardevoir. A lot of Gardevoir decks have no Pokemon that can touch Vulpix. Vulpix's attack makes it so that it cannot be damaged by Pokemon with abilities. So basically, Gardevoir is all about abilities. There's like no Pokemon in the deck that does not have an ability. Like Zacian V has an ability, Shiny Arcana Gardevoir has an ability, Guardy EX has an ability. Really the only way they can attack you is if they're playing like something like a Mewtwo V Union, or they have Cresselia, or just another random attacker that can attack you. And that's one of the main issues I have with Vulpix is it's kind of risky going into the Gardevoir matchup because you tailor-made your deck to, like, kind of beat the Gardevoir deck. But then the Gardevoir whips out a Pokemon without an ability and just bodies you, and it can be tough. They can also loop Cresselia with, like, Miriam Clara. Cresselia can attack Vulpix. It does 110 damage to your Vulpix. They could 3-shot you, and they should have enough resources to beat you. I don't think I'm not quite sold on Arc Vulpix just yet. I do think it's good, though, against Guardy, and you can catch a lot of Gardevoir players off guard, and sometimes they just literally have no way to beat your Vulpix, and that can be pretty funny. You can literally auto-win the matchup if you just start attacking with Vulpix, but again, with the random Gardevoir decks out there, like Gardevoir Mewtwo, and there can be other Gardevoir techs we haven't seen yet, I think that we're definitely going to see Gardevoir with a different psychic Pokemon we haven't seen before do well in EUIC, in my opinion. And I think that Vulpix is a little risky. Vulpix is good in other matchups, not just Gardevoir. It can be okay against Lost Box. It's good against Goodra. Goodra can't attack you because it has an ability. So I think Vulpix is a pretty solid attacker in Arceus. You probably have to play with other things. You can't just go Arc Vulpix. Then you got to play like Arceus with something else. With Vulpix. But I think Arc Vulpix is decent. I'm going to throw it in Rogue for now, though. It's too fringe, in my opinion, to do that well. Next up is Dialga Magnezone. We'll throw that in Tier 2. This one's a really interesting deck. I know a lot of people are really gassing it up right now, including me. I've gassed it up myself. But I think this deck is really sick. It is kind of susceptible to, like, Judge and bad starts, but it's a really strong deck. If it literally sets up, like, fast, it's honestly pretty unbeatable because it's just going to body you. It's going to, like, Star Chronos, and Metal Blast is good right now, too. If you expect to hit a lot of big Pokemon, you can just one-shot them with Metal Blast. Like, if you're playing against Goodra, you just body Goodra, and I think a lot of people are really expecting Goodra to be a play for EUIC, and I think that Dialga just destroys Goodra. Like, it's insane. This deck has a really good matchup against Goodra. I think it beats Lost Box, too. It probably struggles against Sableye Cramzard. I think that's this deck's worst Lost Zone matchup is probably the Sableye Cramorant Charizard deck. But I think it's still a strong deck. It's really powerful, and against most V decks, it can be very deadly. Again, turn 2 Dialga Magnezone is honestly kind of scary, and with Miraidon and Rotom, you have a pretty good setup engine. The deck's a lot more consistent than you might think, and it's honestly scary to play against. Like, this is the one deck where you mainly want to play Judge on your first turn of the game in order to stop them. If Dialga Magnezone goes first, they set up pretty well. If you don't have a Judge, they're probably going to get a turn 2 Magnezone on you, and that's pretty bad. So this deck is susceptible to Judge and Roxanne, too, sometimes if you're not able to follow up with a good setup. So it's kind of the deck's, like, main Achilles heel, though the deck is still really strong, in my opinion, and still worth respecting. I'm going to put it in Tier 2. I think it's a pretty solid Tier 2 deck for now. Next up is DT Mew. You can slap that in Tier 1. I don't think DT Mew is the best way to play Mew right now. It's a little bit more weaker to a lot of different decks. I think the Path to Peak is very helpful, but I think DT Mew is still kind of weak to Lost Box, which is kind of the problem as to why I can't throw DT Mew in Tier 1. But I do think that Mew is well positioned in the format right now, nonetheless. I guess we can talk about Meloetta Mew, too, which is also Tier 1. I mean, I kind of feel bad not throwing Mew in S Tier. I think Mew is definitely, like, top 5 deck in the format, but I'm not sold on Mew just yet. I think that the problem with Mew is Drapion is still insanely popular. Most decks are playing Drapion. Drapion, Sky Seal Stone. Sky Seal Stone in general is just bad for Mew. Like, Gardevoir doesn't even play Drapion, and they just Zacian Sky Seal Stone your Mew. Meloetta Mew, I think, is better than Double Turbo Mew right now. Because I think Meloetta is a lot more aggressive. Like, that turn 1 donk is really important, in my opinion, over, you know, the Double Turbo build. Double Turbo does get to be a little bit more sneakier with what it gets to play, which is nice and all, don't get me wrong. You can also play Technology and Mew, Double Turbo. You get to have more, like, interesting combos like Dreepy with Pidgeot to, like, stall stuff out. You also get to play, like, potentially even go back to Aerodactyl if you want. Like, Lugia is still really good, man. So, yeah, I think that Fusion Mew is good. Meloetta Mew is also pretty good. And I think Meloetta Mew is the better way to play Mew right now. But the problem with Mew is it's just, if it would be S tier if, like, Drapion was not everywhere right now. Like, literally every deck plays a Drapion. Or even just having dark Pokemon. Like, again, Lugia has Tyranitar and Yveltal, which is really difficult to beat. So, I don't know. Meloetta Mew is better, in my opinion, than Fusion Mew. Mew's still Tier 1. Very much you have to respect Mew no matter what. Like, if you're going into UIC without a game plan against Mew, like, you don't play a Drapion or two, you ain't having a good time. But there's too much Drapion right now, man. It just kind of, it messes Mew's game plan up, and it makes Mew not as good as it could be. But definitely still a Tier 1 deck regardless, in my opinion. And again, I think Meloetta Mew is better than Double Turbo Mew, though Double Turbo Mew does get to be a little bit more sneaky with what it gets to play, because you get to play extra cool tech cards over the Meloetta build, which is a little bit more straightforward. Both Meloetta Mew and Fusion Mew, though, do get to, or Double Turbo Mew, sorry, do get to play Path, and that is mainly all you can do right now in the format is, like, Judge Path, Roxanne Path, and hope and pray with your Mew. Next up is Gardevoir Mewtwo. Now, this one is getting a ton of hype right now. This is a weird one where I don't even know where to put it. It's actually popping off in the online tourney scene, and the Mewtwo V Union is really cool. You get this really strong beefcake of an attacker that just one-shots everything with Final Burn. You get the spread attack, which is insane. Like against Lost Box, you go down to your opponent goes down to 3 prizes. You go Rock Sand, Mewtwo V Union in the same turn, and you just Psy-Splosion and pray they ain't got that Drapion. And that's the problem with this deck. In fact, I'm going to put Guardian Mewtwo in Tier 1. For now, I think its performance and results have actually warranted a spot in Tier 1. The deck is legit insane. And almost hard to beat if, like, well, not a hard, well, almost impossible to beat, I should say, honestly, if they get that Mewtwo set up. The problem is, it's a little less consistent than normal Gardevoir. You do get Sky Sealstone Drapion, or Sky Sealstone Zacian, sorry, which is still good. The deck still does things like usual normal Gardevoir does, but you have to squeeze in that Mewtwo legend, which can be awkward to play. Sometimes you can't even get Mewtwo into play because your Peonia doesn't get you the Mewtwo piece. I don't know. I'm not sold on the deck yet, but I still think it's a really awesome deck, and I think that it's probably Tier 1 right now going into EUIC. Again, much like Mew, the deck's issue is going to be Drapion's popularity, and also something like Tyranitar. So the dark Pokemon right now that are good are really good, and they are going to body your Mewtwo. So against Lost Box, you have to go Mewtwo V Union Roxanne, or else you're going to get Drapion. You know, you're going to get killed by Drapion Mirage Gate. And a good Lost Box player will just conserve their resources so that they have the ability to drop a Drapion on you. So the deck isn't, like, perfect right now. I don't think it's the best way to play Gardevoir, but it's really insane right now. And a lot of people are really gassing it up right now. It's really going to be a cool deck for EUIC. I'm going to put it in Tier 1. Next up is Inteleon. That's going to go in Tier 2. Inteleon is a weird deck right now. It's really good against Lost Zone decks, right? It feels like if Inteleon sets up against Lost Zone, it's like you just can't lose because you're just able to double Gunner and Yoga Loop. You're just able to set up some insane plays on your opponent. And it feels almost impossible to lose at that point. The problem is, the deck kind of sucks against everything else in the format, in my opinion. Like, all it can really do is beat Lost Box, beat Miraidon, and maybe beats Mew, because the deck will play 2 Drapion. Other than that, I don't think the deck really beats anything else. But that's the thing, though. This deck can just be a good deck to hit those certain matchups. Like, it's really good against Miraidon, it's really good against Mew, and it's really good against... Well, it's not really good against Mew. It's 50-50 against Mew still, in my opinion, with double Drapion. But it's still good against... it's got the okay Mew matchup, pretty good Miraidon matchup, and just farms Lost Box. So I think that it will probably get full... It'll probably full to Giratina and Goodra pretty easily. But it beats normal Lost Box. And if you want to play a deck that kind of just goes through those 3 decks specifically pretty well, you could probably play it. But again, I don't think it beats anything else. Like, I don't see how it's ever beating, like, I don't even know if it can beat, like, Arctina. Even if Arctina doesn't play Dunsparce, I don't think you're beating Arctina. I don't think you're beating most decks. I don't even think it beats Lugia. Lugia's another really bad matchup, because Lugia doesn't even take much damage from Urshifu, and if Lugia just sets up, they'll just run you over. Like, I don't think this deck is as good as people make it out to be honest, but I think it's still solid, and it just farms Lost Box. And if anything else, if you want to beat Lost Box, you're tired of seeing the Flower Select Colress spam, and you're tired of getting bodied, just play this deck against Lost Box. But we'll have to see how it does. I think it's Tier 2, to be honest, because it has weird matchups. I also don't think it beats Gardevoir. I think Gardevoir is another pretty bad matchup. If Gardevoir just sets up, you just lose, in my opinion. Next up is Lost Zone decks. Here we go, baby. We're getting to the Lost Zone. This is the talk of the town. First off is Lost Zone with a Delphox in it. Put that in Rogue. So the idea behind Delphox is it's replacing Amazing Rare Raikou, where Raikou does 120-120 snipe. Delphox does the exact same thing. It does 120-120 snipe, except you're a fire Pokemon and your energy got to go to Lost Zone. I think Delphox is honestly a really sweet idea. The problem is the format is in such a weird spot. I don't know if Delphox is really it right now, but I definitely think it's a really cool concept that honestly can be it can catch people off guard. I mean, Lost Box, you know, you're playing against Lost Box, you're always going to bench Manaphy anyways, and that can throw people off because they'll bench Manaphy because they respect their Greninja, right? And that's the problem, right? This Lost Box still to deal with Greninja, but late game Delphox still sounds kind of cool. You basically play the deck like Lost Dogs, where you, instead of using Raikou, you're using Delphox. Delphox is a 2-prizer, so it does give up 2 prizes, which can be awkward, and, you know, it's a little bit more, you know, yeah, you give up 2 prizes, a little more awkward. However, you do get the ability to that 120-120 snipe, and that is still pretty good in my opinion. So I still think that Lost Delphox is a cool concept. We haven't really seen it like pop off right now, but it's still cool in my opinion. Next up is Goodra. We're throwing Goodra in Tier 1. I think Goodra is a really good deck going into UIC. Goodra has a great matchup spread across the board. I think its worst matchup is most likely just going to be probably just Mew, and that's it. I think Goodra probably has a decent time against everything else, even Gardevoir decks, because Gardevoir will still struggle to KO a Goodra with full HP. Goodra just completely destroys Lost Box, like, I guess Giratina is also kind of a tricky matchup, but Gudra just destroys Lost Box. It, like, destroys it. Rolling Iron against Lost Box is so good. And that's kind of the convincing thing about Gudra. It's having a decent time against most decks in the format, except for Dialga, Giratina, maybe, and also, like I said, you're going to have a tougher time, too, against Mew. But even Mew isn't unbeatable. But yeah, Gudra's really cool in the format, in my opinion. I think it's a pretty solid play for EUIC. Gudra's pretty good right now. It's doing well in online tourneys. Actually picking up a lot of steam right now in online tourneys. And Gudra, I think, would have been a better, like, underdog play for EUIC as opposed to kind of doing well right now. If people expect Gudra, then it might not be as good. Like, Gardevoir might start running Escape Rope in their decks, and all of a sudden, like, more decks will play Rope to make it easier to beat Gudra. But I think Gudra's still really insane right now, nonetheless. And I think it's still a pretty solid deck for EUIC. Gudra would have been a great play for EUIC had Lost Gudra kind of been under the radar. If it wasn't, like, doing well in online tourneys, I think Lost Gudra would have been a great under the radar deck, but we'll have to see. I still think it's a great pick for EUIC. It's got a pretty decent matchup spread across the board, and it beats Lost Box pretty convincingly, which is kind of the main selling point behind playing Lost Zone Gudra, is that really good Lost Box matchup. Next up is Lost Kyogre. Put that in tier 2. This deck's starting to do pretty well, but I think a lot of people are still skeptical on whether or not Kyogre is really that good. The deck did lose a few good cards. Like, you have to rely heavily on Energy Recycler now over having Rod plus Recycler, which made it a little bit easier to conserve your energy. So the deck isn't, like, perfect, but I think Lost Kyogre is still something that people might want to respect regardless. Kyogre is still an insane attacker and still really powerful nonetheless. Like, Kyogre will body most decks, and I think that the power of Kyogre the power of Kyogre is really good right now, in my opinion. And I think that Lost Box can still easily pull off Kyogres convincingly. It's not, like, impossible. Like, again, you just have to play more Energy Recycler. You might even have to play 3 Recycler. I don't know. You just have to very much, never Flower Select or Colorless away your Energy Recyclers, because they are the most important card in the Kyogre deck. But I think Lost Kyogre is still, like, solid, in my opinion. I'm going to put it in tier 2 for now, though. I'm not sold on it, and a lot of people are also not sold on the deck just yet. Also, still very hard to pilot, regardless. I think that's another turnoff, is a lot of people are, going to be scared to play it because this deck is not hard. It's not easy to play this deck. Lost Kyogre is still a pretty difficult deck to pilot. But yeah, I still think it's pretty good, and a good player can probably do really well with it. And I think it's still worth trying out. I mean, Kyogre is still an insane card right now in the format. And there's actually a lot of decks right now that don't play Manaphy. Like, Arceus decks don't play Manaphy. Mirai doesn't play Manaphy. Mew doesn't play Manaphy. You see what I'm saying? Like, Manaphy is not as good right now in a lot of decks. I mean, decks do play it, but, like, the decks that don't play it, Kyogre is just like, okay, I got Kyogre. As long as my deck does what it's supposed to do, as long as I play properly, my Kyogre is going to win the game all the time because you have no Manaphy in your deck. And I think that's the selling point behind the Kyogre. Next up is Lost Zone with Dragonite. You can call this Turbo Lost Box. I think it's honestly tier S. I think most people agree that Lost Zone, Mirage Gate, whatever you want to call it, is tier S. Whether you're playing Dragonite or whether you're not playing Dragonite, whether you're playing the Turbo build, or whether you're playing the Sky Seal Stone build, Lost Box is just easily the best deck right now in the format. It's even better than Gardevoir, in my opinion. I think Lost Box is, without a doubt, just the best deck in the format right now, and it's the deck to beat. And if your deck does not have a good matchup against Lost Box, do not play it, because Lost Box will destroy. You have to have a game plan against Lost Box going into EUIC. In my opinion, you have to have a game plan against Gardevoir, Lost Box, and Mew, but I definitely think you have to respect Lost Box for EUIC. And there's so many ways to play it, and that's what makes it good, is you don't know if they're going to be playing the Zapdos in the deck, or they're playing the Dragonite at all. You don't know if they have this or that in the deck. Like, it's a very scary deck to play against going into a closed deckless format, and Lost Box is going to be very good. And I'm sure we're going to see some other crazy version of Lost Box do well. But again, whether it be the Forest Seal Stone build of Lost Box, the Turbo build, or whether it is the Mirage Gate build where it's just trying to use Sky Seal Stone / attackers like Drapion, Zapdos, Raikou, you gotta respect Lost Box. I think Lost Box is just so good right now. You have to respect it. It's the best deck in the format, which sucks because a lot of people are like, oh, Lost Box sucks now because it lost net. Nope, still the best deck in the format. You gotta beat Lost Box. Going into UIC, in my opinion, if you're not beating Lost Box, you're going to get bodied because Lost Box will just absolutely ravage on you. So yeah, Lost Box, easily one of the best decks right now. You got to beat it. It's the best deck in the format. If I were to do a top 10 best decks, Lost Box would be at the very tippy top of that list. It's just too good. Next up, we have Tina. Lost Tina's probably tier 1. A lot of people say it's tier S. I mean, it did so well in Japan at the start of the format in Japan. Like, it did really well in Japan, but after that, it kind of started to underperform and flop a little bit, which is kind of funny. It's also just really weird. It's honestly got a pretty solid matchup spread. except for the matchup against actual just Lost Box itself. Like, I think it beats mostly everything in the format. Like, I think it beats mostly everything. Like, literally every deck we've looked at, other than the Lost Zone decks, I think it just beats all those decks, even Gudra. The problem is, it's a bit worse into the normal straight Lost Box Mirage Gate build, because you're playing a deck with Giratina, you can't use the Giratina against Lost Box at all, because you just get farmed by Skyseal Stone, and you're using a 2-prizer, and the prize trade is just not in your favor. And then you have to play like a Sableye Cramorant deck, and it's just really awkward in my opinion. It's just not a good time in the Lost Box matchup. You're just playing basically against the Lost Box Mirror, you're just playing against you're playing a worse Lost Box deck than what your opponent has with Mirage Gate and Sableye and Snorlax and Zam and stuff. Like, they just have a better deck than you at that point. And that's the problem with the Lost Tina. Tina would be tier S if it didn't have such a weird, sketchy matchup against just normal straight Lost Box. And that's the issue with Giratina. Though, again, I think it probably beats everything in the format. It's a really good deck. It's a Lost Zone deck with a really good attacker, and I think that's one of the things that gives it a good selling point. You have the insta-KO, you have the one-hit KO potential, you have Sableye and Cramorant in the deck still, and you have Greninja, so you still have all the things Lost Box usually has, but you also get Giratina, which can be very tough to deal with, and I think that's honestly insane. Giratina would honestly be an S tier deck if it just had that little bit of a better matchup against straight Lost Box. But because of it, it's just probably going to be a little worse over normal Lost Box, but probably second place behind normal Lost Box. Like, if we're ranking Lost Box decks right now, I think Tina is like just barely behind normal Lost Box. In fact, Lost Tina could genuinely be near the front of the tier 1 list. And even potentially could be the best deck in tier 1, like behind Miraidon and Mew and Arctina. I think it legit could be that good of a deck right now. It's just, again, it beats mostly everything else except for that normal Lost Box matchup, which is kind of the problem. Next up is Sableye Cramsard, another tier 1 deck. A lot of people are really gassing this deck up, but it's also one of those weird Lost Zone decks that just kind of doesn't do enough, in my opinion. It's kind of weird how I want to describe Sableye Cramsard. Like, Sableye Cramsard's honestly not even that bad. It's really good. I think it's a tier 1 deck for sure. Really strong Lost Zone variant. But I think a lot of people would just say that Mirage Gate decks are better. Sableye Cramsard doesn't get to play Skyseal Stone. It's a little bit more linear. It's also it falls very easily to Lost City, and that's another problem with this deck, is it falls to Lost City, but it does get to abuse Clara, which is kind of like what Lost Zone has to play now because it lost Ornate Rod, and it has to start playing Clara, but then it's just like, I don't want to play Clara, and that's kind of the issue. But this deck gets to really abuse Clara, and that's one of the selling points of it. Charizard's also very good right now. There's so many times where Charizard will win you the game, and it's very hard to deal with. If you're not, your opponents play Lost City, then Charizard can cause you some issues, and Lost Sableye Cramsard really does get to abuse turn 2 Sableye. Like, this deck can very consistently pull off turn 2 Sableyes, and that is very powerful. Like, turn 2 Sableye is ridiculously good. Really good against Gardevoir, really good against Lost Box Mirror, really good against any Lost Zone deck for that matter, really good against most decks. Like, a lot of decks will struggle when you just Sableye them turn 2. It's kind of insane. So yeah, Sableye Cramsard's pretty strong right now, and I think a lot of people have to refine the list for it to be good, but who knows, it could be the play for EUIC. But for now, I think it's definitely a tier 1 deck going into EUIC. Not the best version of Lost Box, not an S tier deck. Still a very strong deck regardless, and still has a lot of crazy plays it can make. And again, the threat of Charizard and turn 2 Sableye is something that I think a lot of people really have to respect. The deck also gets to play Cross Switcher. Another thing I want to note is Cross Switcher being in the deck is also a thing that makes this deck pretty strong right now. Next up is Miraidon with Flying Pikachu. I'll put that in tier 2. Miraidon Pikachu is kind of a cool concept. Again, Flying Pikachu is really good right now, in my opinion, against Lugia and against Lost Box decks. But Miraidon Pikachu, basically just you use the Pikachu to help fix the Lost Box matchup. Or even the Lugia matchup, too. That's kind of the point of why this deck will play Flying Pikachu. But yeah, Miraidon Pikachu is kind of cute. I like it. Probably more or less a tier 2 deck over like straight Miraidon with like Magnezone, or just like a straight Miraidon Regieleki deck with a few tech cards like Klefki. But yeah, Miraidon Pikachu is kind of sick. I think Pikachu is a really good tech card in Miraidon that I think a lot of people are low-key sleeping on. And next up is Lugia, and I mean, I think Lugia deserves to be a tier S deck. I think Lugia is a great deck right now. It's really good. It has a great time against a lot of decks. It's hitting for weakness. You got Tyranitar for Mew and Gardevoir. You have Stonjourner for Arceus and Miraidon. And you're also just still Lugia at the end of the day. And I also think you have a pretty good matchup against Lost Box, especially thanks to the Serena. The Radiant Serena is really good in Lugia because you're able to counter Greninja Sableyes against your Archeops pretty well. Like, it's really good. Now, Lugia doesn't play Dunsparce or Manaphy right now, and those are kind of the deck's biggest weaknesses. Is Lugia is kind of still playing like Lugia used to do. It doesn't play any switching cards. It doesn't play any way out of paralysis. It doesn't really play many ways to retreat in general. Like, you're really just relying on your opponent just playing a very straightforward deck. If they have some spicy tech card for the Lugia matchup, like the Eviltal or the the paralyzed strats, or even just having some weird stall tech card, it can be really tough to play Lugia. And I think Lugia is a very risky deck for EUIC, because I think if you're going to play like a vanilla Lugia deck that we've seen with Single Strike, it could be tough, because if you get paired against somebody who like respects Lugia and has some wacky way to beat Lugia, you're going to lose. So I think Lugia might have to start playing like Rope or something. My 2 cents anyways, but Lugia is an S tier deck. I think it's an insane deck right now. Tyranitar is a really good attacker. Yes, Stone Journer. Lugia, being able to still go double Archeops is insane. Now, Lugia is a casino right now. It is a very, very coin flip heavy deck, and that's kind of the thing that turns a lot of people off about playing Lugia, is it's a coin flip deck right now. Or you can play it with Mezagoza Great Ball instead of Mezagoza with Capturing Aroma. I think the Great Ball build is low-key better, because like you don't have to rely on like coin flips, which is a bit nicer. But yeah, I really do think that Lugia is a tier S deck right now. I think it's insane. It's doing really well in online tourneys too. Like it's still making up for like almost the second most played deck in most of the online tourneys right now. Like I think the deck is still just absolutely insane right now in the format. It still does really well. Still something you have to respect. Like I've thought about Aerodactyl still in this meta, and people are like, Aerodactyl sucks. Why would you ever play it? Well, Lugia is still a really good deck right now. And I don't know, man. I think Lugia is just insane for EUIC. In my opinion, it's one of the BDIFs right now. One of the decks you have to beat. Like, the 3 decks you have to beat are probably Gardevoir, Lugia, and Lost Box, and then Mew. But you don't have to really think about it, because I'll just put Drapion on my deck and I beat Mew, right? So it's not as bad. But if your deck doesn't have, like, some kind of strategy against Lugia, Mew, or Lugia, Gardevoir, Lost Box, you ain't having a good time. I think Lugia definitely is one of the top decks in the meta right now. It's really, really strong, and beats a lot of things right now. Next up is Stall. We'll call Stall a rogue deck. Stall hasn't, like, I don't think it's broken through yet, but Stall is something that still wins games, and still kind of an underdeveloped deck. Stall has a lot of win cons against a lot of decks right now. The idea is Snorlax with block, where if it's in the active spot, your opponent's active cannot retreat. So if you bench a Luminion, or you just bench a Pokemon that can't attack at all, or do anything in the matchup, Snorlax will win the game. They'll win the game. If you have no way to switch it, or you're out of switch, or you have no way to move the Pokemon, you're literally just going to lose to a Snorlax, and that is very good. And I think Snorlax is legit good, and I do think that this control deck is really strong. We're going to call it a rogue deck right now, because it is. It's a rogue deck at the end of the day. I think Snorlax is a rogue deck right now. Until somebody does really well with it, and people start to go, oh my god, I got to start respecting Stall. Yeah, we're going to call it a rogue deck, but I definitely think we could see Snorlax do really well at EUIC. I think it's a pretty strong deck. Did lose a lot of resources. I think Gormandize was obviously a big loss, and control's a little bit slower now. Miltank isn't as good because EXs exist, but Snorlax is still kind of good, and I think that the Stall strategy is good. A lot of decks don't really respect the Stall strategies, in my opinion, right now. Not that many decks respect Stall, and that is what makes Snorlax go so scary. Next up is Arceus Goodra. I'll put that in tier 2. We've seen some interesting Arc Goodra lists do well. One was Slowbro, which is a really cool tech card that I'm definitely going to be looking at very soon on the channel. But yeah, Arc Goodra right now is kind of sweet. It's a cool deck. I mean, again, like I said earlier with Lost Zone Goodra, Goodra is a really good deck right now. It beats Lost Box, and Goodra can mostly uptrade with everything else in the format. The problem with Arceus Goodra is Arceus Goodra doesn't really get Moisture Star. And that's kind of the big issue with it, is Arc Goodra, yeah, it doesn't really get to play Moisture Star. And a lot of people want to use Moisture Star. Moisture Star is one of the main selling points of Goodra. And when Arceus Goodra doesn't really get to use it, because sometimes you have to use Starbirth, and that's kind of the deck's biggest Achilles heel. However, Arc Goodra is still a solid deck, in my opinion. I mean, Goodra in general is just solid right now, in my opinion. Like, I think it's still decent. So I'm going to throw Arc Goodra in tier 2. Next is Palkia. We'll put that in Rogue. I mean, whether it be like Palkia with like extra attackers, or Palkia with Ice Rider is another deck, or even Palkia Kyurem, I think Palkia is probably a rogue deck. Palkia's biggest issue is it's a little bit worse now than it used to be. If you get paired against Miraidon, or a deck with a lightning Pokemon like Flying Pikachu, you're going to probably have a bad time. But Palkia is still not bad. I mean, you still get the ability to have like early Greninja pressure, which can be kind of cool. You get to play other water Pokemon. I think like Palkia Vulpix could be a really cool concept. Palkia Vulpix is great because you can use Vulpix against Gardevoir. Like I said earlier with Arceus Vulpix, Palkia is another deck that gets to use Vulpix, and that's really good. I think Palkia is a really good card right now, and definitely worth trying out in the format. And as long as you just don't play against Miraidon or a deck with Flying Pikachu, you're probably okay. And who knows, maybe even Palkia is fine against Miraidon. I mean, Palkia can one-shot Miraidon pretty easily. They're going to fill their bench up subspace well, one-shot them pretty simply. I don't even think it's bad. It's whoever gets the first prize probably can beat Miraidon anyways. I think Palkia is definitely worth trying right now, in my opinion. I don't think it's a bad deck at all. You just have to figure out how you're going to beat stuff like Lost Box and Giratina and Gardevoir, and I think Palkia could legit be something cute to try out for EUIC. And then finally, we have Flaffy Box, another rogue deck. I mean, Flaffy Box does get to use Miraidon and like Raichu and Raikou and stuff, but I think Flaffy Box is a rogue deck. I think Flaffy Box is kind of cute. Losing Vigavolt sucks. I think Flaffy Box legit could have been a solid deck if Vigavolt existed, because that Flaffy Box deck with Medicham that kind of popped off at the end of the Silver Tempest meta was a really cool deck that never really got to see, too much shine because it was kind of short-lived. But I think Flaffy Box is a really cool idea that, I mean, it's a deck that can abuse Skysteel Stone. Raichu V is kind of cool to blow stuff up. And you still get the pressure of, like, Miraidon. You can also play stuff like Magnezone and stuff. So I think Flaffy Box is worth trying out, in my opinion. I don't hate it. I think Flaffy Box is legit a solid deck, or something that, like, could be respected right now. And I definitely wouldn't mind seeing a Flaffy Box deck do well. It's not a terrible deck. It has a lot of attacking options. And that's, again, the main selling point is the amount of attackers you get to choose from to build your Flaffy Box deck around. But that'll be it for me on today's EUIC tier list video. Again, these are all the decks I chose. There could be more to choose from. After EUIC, there's probably going to be a couple more decks we could add to this tier list that do well. I'm excited for EUIC. I cannot wait to watch it and see what ends up doing well this weekend at EUIC. But let me know what you thought of the tier list down below. What do you think of my ranking? Was it accurate? Was it inaccurate? I would love to hear it down in the comments below. And yeah, if you haven't subbed to the second channel yet, here, click the subscribe button. If you want to try this tier list yourself, I will leave a link to it down below in the description so you can try it yourself. But that'll be it for me. Have a good day. Bye-bye.